I should have seen it coming. I should have recognized the pattern long before that Christmas morning when my sister got a brand new car and I got a piggy bank with a single dollar tucked inside. Looking back, the regret sits heavy on my chest. My name is Olivia Carter, and for most of my life, I convinced myself that the people closest to me, family, fiancé, relatives who claim to love me, would eventually notice the imbalance I kept trying to ignore. But the truth is, the first warning sign wasn't dramatic at all. It was subtle, almost boring, the kind of detail you brush past because you want to believe everything is fine. Months before Christmas, I had transferred part of my savings into a joint account for future plans. I thought it showed commitment and responsibility. Later, I realized I was the only one contributing. Small deposits from me, none from them. Not a single question about how long it took me to earn it, or what I might need for myself. Just quiet expectation, an unspoken assumption that I would always find a way to manage. I shrugged it off. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I was overthinking. I told myself love naturally comes with uneven seasons and mine would eventually balance out. I trusted too easily, forgave too quickly, minimized too much. That was my pattern. Carry the weight and hope someone noticed. By the time I finally did notice, by the time I realized how deep the asymmetry ran, everything had already gone too far. And the cost of waking up, of walking away, of forcing everyone to face what they'd taken for granted, became far greater than any of us expected. Before I tell you what he said next, and what unfolded after I stepped out of that house, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to see how far this story travels. I kept driving north the way someone flips through old pages, not to relive them, but to finally understand what they meant. Nothing about my childhood had ever looked unusual from the outside. It was the quiet kind of imbalance, the kind people dismiss because it doesn't leave marks anyone can point to. Even now, I can recognize how early the groundwork was laid, long before I had the language to describe it. It started with routines. When my sister Jenna Carter arrived, the household seemed to reorganize itself around her needs, and my father, Mark Carter, and mother Paula Carter encouraged the idea that an older child should naturally adapt. I was still small enough to believe structure meant stability, so I obeyed. I took the role given to me without protest, convinced that behaving well would eventually earn me the same softness everyone else seemed to receive effortlessly. As years passed, subtle patterns formed. If someone needed help, I stepped in. If something went wrong, I was expected to handle it. If Jenna wanted attention, everything paused until she got it. No one said the words outright, but the distribution of care was clear. I learned to tidy up quickly, to stay quiet when adults talked, to shoulder tasks no one noticed until they weren't done. Every praise offered to Jenna came with an unspoken comparison, and every acknowledgement I received was framed as maturity rather than affection. By middle school, I understood the structure without needing reminders. I handled schoolwork alone while Jenna got guided projects and last-minute supply runs. I saved birthday money for things I needed, while new outfits appeared in Jenna's closet without any occasion attached. Relatives complimented her brightness, her charm, the way she filled a room. They complimented my reliability, as if I were an appliance functioning as intended. The gap widened as we grew older. I worked part-time at 13, not because Mark or Paula demanded it, but because I knew extracurriculars, supplies, and personal expenses wouldn't cover themselves. Meanwhile, Jenna cycled through hobbies, art classes, cheer clinics, photography workshops, each one funded without hesitation. It wasn't jealousy. Not at first. It was confusion. The math never added up, yet I kept adjusting my expectations until the imbalance felt normal. High school intensified the contrast. I attended study groups and saved for test fees, while Jenna's schedule revolved around activities that required constant rides, fees, and attention. When I prepared for my college applications, I spent nights piecing together essays and researching scholarships. My parents wished me luck, then turned back to the logistical juggling of Jenna's latest pursuits. I convinced myself it wasn't indifference, just timing, responsibility, practicality. Words I repeated often enough that they eventually numbed me. College exposed the truth more clearly. I secured loans, grants, and work-study positions to afford my education. I balanced coursework with shifts that ran late into the evening. Meanwhile, Jenna stayed home after graduation, testing creative paths until something felt right. Mark and Paula paid her tuition when she eventually enrolled part-time in a program she selected a week before classes started. They framed it as support, opportunity, encouragement. They told me I'd always been self-sufficient, as if competence were a shield against needing anything at all. Looking back, it wasn't the unequal resources that shaped me most. It was the unequal concern. When Jenna struggled, the household reoriented to lift her. When I struggled, it became a lesson about independence. When Jenna succeeded, everyone cheered. When I succeeded, they nodded. The emotional math, again, never balanced. Yet I never challenged it. I told myself fairness wasn't essential. I told myself every family had quirks. I told myself I was strong enough not to need what others seemed to require. But beneath all the rationalizing, a quiet ache collected year after year. Not anger, just absence. An emptiness shaped by everything I gave and everything I learned not to expect in return. Even then, even knowing all this now, I still believed things could shift someday. I still believed effort would be noticed, that steadiness would matter, that love would eventually circle back in my direction. I didn't understand that patterns, once cemented, rarely dissolve on their own. And without meaning to, I carried those early lessons into adulthood, reproducing them in every space I entered, especially at home. By the time I entered adulthood, a different rhythm had taken hold. One shaped less by obligation and more by the quiet pressure to prove I could build a life without depending on anyone. After graduating, I moved to Portland and took a position as a junior project coordinator. The pay wasn't remarkable, but the structure suited me, and the steady pace of managing timelines gave me a sense of control I hadn't recognized as survival until much later. For the first time, there was a routine that belonged solely to me. Living on my own forced a kind of clarity. Rent, utilities, transportation, groceries. I handled each responsibility with a precision that came from years of practice. Meanwhile, Jenna floated comfortably in a space I had never been allowed to occupy. She remained at home, exploring creative paths and testing interests one season at a time. Mark and Paula offered her the cushion of flexibility, insisting she needed time to find a direction. I tried not to compare, but the contrast was unavoidable. I worked late nights managing subcontractor schedules, while Jenna prepared for weekend pop-up markets and short-lived internships that faded as quickly as they appeared. Still, I kept my focus on progress. When a senior manager left unexpectedly, I stepped up without being asked. The promotion didn't come immediately, but the recognition did. My supervisor called my reliability unshakable, a word that struck me as familiar yet foreign in a setting where it finally felt like praise, not expectation. When the promotion eventually arrived, I thought it might represent a turning point, not only for my career but in how my family would see me. The idea of coming home for Christmas that year carried more hope than I wanted to admit. I imagined the conversation where I shared the news, the moment their eyes softened with genuine pride, the possibility, however faint, that the years of overlooked effort might finally register. I bought thoughtful gifts, each chosen with care, stretching my budget because the gesture felt important. It wasn't about repayment. It was about belonging, about wanting them to notice the life I was building. As December approached, The pressure at work intensified. We closed out projects before the holiday shutdown, and the days blurred into long hours of documentation and coordination. But even in the exhaustion, there was a sense of momentum. On my last evening before the drive south, my friend Tessa Nguyen stopped by my apartment with takeout. She teased me for triple-checking my suitcase, then softened when she saw the careful wrapping on the gifts laid out on my table. She said they looked like presents chosen by someone who still believed in people. I brushed it off, but the comment stayed with me longer than I expected. The drive to Salem the next morning was quiet, the highway lined with bare trees and frost. I rehearsed nothing, but a quiet anticipation filled the car. When I arrived, the house looked nearly untouched by time. Mark had hung a new set of lights along the roofline, and Paula had decorated the porch with seasonal wreaths. I stepped inside carrying a mixture of worry and hope, an unstable blend I had grown accustomed to over the years. By late afternoon, preparations for Christmas Eve were underway. Paula coordinated the kitchen with the same brisk energy she always had, moving between pots and trays while I slipped naturally into the supporting role I knew well. Jenna arrived later, bringing with her the scattered brightness that always seemed to capture a room's attention. She talked about recent projects and casual opportunities that had drifted her way during the fall, filling the space with the ease of someone who had never questioned whether she belonged at the center of things. As the evening settled, family members filtered in, offering polite questions about my job and life in Portland. I answered them easily, though their curiosity had the faint distance of small talk rather than genuine interest. Still, I kept my expectations steady. I told myself that tomorrow offered a fresh chance, that sharing the promotion might spark something meaningful, that years of endurance might finally land somewhere other than silence. Even then, I didn't recognize how much weight I had placed on a single holiday. I didn't understand that hope, when stretched too thin, becomes indistinguishable from denial. Morning arrived with a kind of stillness that felt almost ceremonial, the way holidays often disguise themselves as something gentler than they really are. I woke early, trying to steady the mixture of anticipation and restraint that always surfaced when I returned home. The house was already moving around me, familiar sounds forming a script I had followed for years without thinking. I stepped into it automatically, carrying the quiet hope that this day might unfold differently. The kitchen filled with the rhythm of preparation as I organized ingredients and cleared counters, falling into a role I hadn't questioned since childhood. Jenna drifted in and out, wrapped in the easy confidence that had always surrounded her. She hovered over pastries, scrolled through her phone, made brief comments about plans she might pursue after the new year. Her presence drew attention without effort, and the room shifted subtly each time she entered. I kept my focus on what needed to be done, telling myself not to read too deeply into old patterns that didn't have to define the morning. My father moved between tasks with a kind of lightness I rarely saw during the rest of the year. He checked outdoor decorations, adjusted minor details, and commented on how festive everything looked. My mother directed the flow of the kitchen with practiced efficiency, her movements precise, her expectations unspoken but familiar. None of it felt hostile, yet none of it held the awareness I had quietly longed for. I tried to release the tension I carried, reminding myself that today was meant to be celebratory. As the morning progressed, relatives arrived gradually, filling the house with greetings and casual conversations. I carried plates, arranged snacks, and answered polite questions about work. Each interaction felt rehearsed, not intentionally dismissive, but lacking depth. I could sense the gentle divide that always formed at these gatherings, Jenna occupying the center of attention with her stories and projects, while I stood slightly outside the circle, acknowledged, but not fully seen. It wasn't painful, exactly. It was more like an old echo resurfacing, a reminder of where I fit in the family's structure. Still, I held on to the idea that the gift exchange might offer a moment of connection. I pictured sharing the news of my promotion, imagined the brief flicker of pride that might cross my parents' faces, hoped for an acknowledgement that my efforts had meaning beyond practical usefulness. I didn't expect extravagance. I expected recognition, or rather, I hoped for it, even as part of me whispered that hope was a fragile thing to bring into this house. When the time came to gather around the tree, the atmosphere shifted with a familiar sense of excitement. Jenna settled comfortably among the group, glowing with anticipation. My mother distributed the first few packages, each one received with enthusiasm. I watched quietly, feeling the warmth of the room press against the edges of my composure. Then my father stepped out onto the porch for a moment, returning with an energy that signaled something significant. He gestured toward the driveway, and Jenna rose with a spark in her expression that told me she already sensed what waited outside. Everyone followed her out, their reactions swelling into collective delight as they saw the new car parked in the drive. Compliments echoed around her, layered with admiration and affectionate teasing. I stood slightly behind the group, absorbing the scene with a kind of numb clarity. It wasn't the extravagance itself that caught me off guard. It was the ease with which such gestures seemed reserved for her. The reinforcement of that imbalance settled into me with a weight I couldn't immediately name. When we returned inside, my mother handed me a small wrapped box. The simplicity of it didn't bother me at first. I peeled back the paper, expecting something modest but thoughtful. Instead, I found a ceramic piggy bank and a single dollar folded neatly inside. The room didn't quiet. No one paused. There was an assumption that the gesture fit me somehow, that practicality or humor softened the imbalance. But something shifted in me as I held that small, hollow object. Not anger, clarity. A realization that the distance I had tried for years to bridge might never truly close. I placed the box beside me gently, feeling the edges of a decision forming, though I didn't yet understand how far it would take me. Night settled in with a heaviness that made every movement feel deliberate, as if the air itself insisted I pay attention to what happened next. I went upstairs under the pretense of getting changed, but once the door closed behind me, the quiet stripped away whatever composure I had left. The small box still rested in my hands, its weight disproportionate to its meaning. I set it on the bed and stared at it long enough for the room to lose its shape around the edges. What formed inside me wasn't anger. It was recognition. A stark understanding that years of imbalance hadn't been accidental or temporary. They were structural, embedded, expected. The morning's clarity hardened into something simpler. I could no longer mold myself around a dynamic that had no intention of shifting. There was no dramatic breaking point, just the slow crystallizing of a decision that had been waiting beneath the surface for too long. Packing didn't take much thought. I moved with a steadiness that surprised me, pulling my suitcase from the closet and folding clothes without urgency. Each item that disappeared into the bag felt like a piece of myself I was reclaiming, not from others, but from the version of me that had tolerated too much. I didn't rehearse explanations. I didn't construct speeches. I didn't outline grievances. What I felt wasn't theatrical enough for any of that. It was quiet, resolved, certain. Once my things were gathered, I looked around the room that had once belonged to me, but no longer resembled anything familiar. Boxes stacked against the wall, holiday clutter spread across the floor, storage bins pushed into corners. None of it suggested that I had ever been considered in its arrangement. The space confirmed what the gift had implied. I existed in this household as someone functional, not central. It was an understanding I couldn't unlearn. Carrying my suitcase downstairs, I noticed how seamlessly the celebration continued. Laughter drifted from the living room, layered with the hum of background music and the chatter of relatives. I moved through the hallway unnoticed, passing framed photos of moments where my presence appeared only in the periphery. The realization didn't hurt. It simply aligned with everything else. When I stepped outside, the cold pressed against me with an unfiltered sharpness, but it felt grounding rather than harsh. I loaded my things into the car and took one last look at the house, not with sentiment, but with a detached acceptance that marked the end of something long overdue. Leaving wasn't an act of retaliation, it was an act of returning to myself. The road stretched ahead with a quiet that steadied me. Snow drifted in thin sheets across the asphalt, making the edges of the world blur and sharpen in alternating breaths. My mind, freed from the noise of expectation, replayed the past few hours with an almost clinical clarity. There was no single moment to blame, only the accumulation of countless small truths finally demanding acknowledgement. My phone vibrated against the console, its screen lighting up the cabin. I expected concern, an inquiry, a hint of awareness about my absence. Instead, the message reminded me to handle the monthly utility payments as if nothing about my departure warranted attention. The ease with which the obligation was assigned to me, without hesitation, without context, cut through whatever uncertainty remained. It was the final confirmation that the role I played within that household had never been viewed as optional. Driving further north, I felt a subtle unwinding inside me, the kind that comes when someone steps out of a pattern that has shaped them for too long. I didn't know exactly where I would stop for the night, but the uncertainty didn't frighten me. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't trying to meet expectations that had never been made for my benefit. Each mile marked a small reclamation, a quiet declaration that I would no longer hold together a structure that asked everything and offered nothing in return. When the lights of a small roadside town appeared in the distance, I felt a shift inside me, an opening, a beginning I hadn't anticipated but suddenly needed. I turned off the highway, ready to let the next chapter take shape on its own terms. By the time morning light filtered into the sky, the momentum of the previous night had carried me farther than I expected. The stillness that accompanied dawn felt like a quiet agreement between me and the unfamiliar town I had stopped in, a confirmation that the path ahead was mine alone to shape. Continuing north toward Seattle felt less like escape and more like alignment, a shift into a version of my life that didn't require constant justification. When I finally reached the city, exhaustion settled into my body with a dense, steady weight, but beneath it was something clearer. I texted my friend Tessa Nguyen, who opened her door without hesitation, folding me into the calm familiarity of her apartment. She didn't demand explanations or offer unsolicited solutions. Her presence alone created enough space for me to breathe. That first night in Seattle, I slept without waiting for a message, a comment, or a call that might pull me back into a pattern I could no longer sustain. Over the next few days, I transferred to the company's northern office, a move that surprised my supervisor less than I expected. The transition was efficient, unburdened by sentiment or reluctance, and the new environment offered a quiet reprieve from the expectations I had carried in my previous role. The structure of the workday steadied me. Each completed task served as proof that I remained capable even while rebuilding myself from the inside out. At Tessa's suggestion, I scheduled an appointment with Dr. Elise Grant, a therapist known for her direct but compassionate approach. During our first session, she didn't dwell on the specifics of what had happened. Instead, she asked questions that traced the outlines of long-standing patterns, questions that revealed how much of my identity had been anchored in responsibility rather than autonomy. For the first time, someone named the imbalance without minimizing it. The validation was quiet but profound, settling into places I had ignored for years. As weeks passed, the rhythm of my new life took shape. I moved out of Tessa's apartment into a small place of my own, nothing extravagant, but undeniably mine. Each piece of furniture I assembled, every item I chose, contributed to a sense of belonging I had never fully experienced. The act of arranging the space felt like rewriting the blueprint of who I was allowed to be. Work introduced new connections as well. Through a collaborative project between departments, I met Ethan Collins, an environmental engineer whose steady focus contrasted with the chaos of the season. Our conversations unfolded naturally, shaped by shared workload rather than personal disclosure. There was no urgency, no expectation, only a growing ease that reminded me how different interactions could be when stripped of unspoken obligations. I didn't label it anything. I simply noticed the absence of tension. Meanwhile, emails from my family reduced in frequency but swelled in intensity. They contained accusations, confusion, and subtle manipulations framed as concern. I responded to none of them. Dr. Grant helped me understand that silence, in this case, wasn't avoidance. It was a boundary, a necessary one. Over time, information trickled in through extended relatives. My father had lost hours at work due to company restructuring. My mother had taken a part-time evening job at a local store to compensate. The car they had given Jenna required payments they hadn't fully calculated. The dealership repossessed it after a missed deadline. Jenna eventually picked up a retail job, not out of choice, but necessity. None of these developments gave me satisfaction. They simply revealed how imbalanced the foundation had been, how much strain my constant compliance had shielded them from. The distance allowed perspective I hadn't possessed before. It wasn't that my absence caused their difficulties. It was that my presence had long masked them. Without me absorbing responsibilities, cushioning consequences, and smoothing transitions, the structure they maintained could no longer hold itself upright. That realization didn't feel triumphant. It felt honest. As winter deepened, my apartment gradually transformed into a reflection of the life I was choosing. I filled a small ceramic bowl with spare $1 bills, each one representing a week of deliberate self-prioritization. The ritual was subtle but grounding, marking time in a way that honored movement rather than endurance. Seattle didn't erase the past, but it gave me the space to examine it without distortion. For the first time, the future didn't feel predetermined or narrowed by obligation. It felt expansive, shaped by choice, presence, and a quiet resilience I was finally learning to recognize as my own. The season turned again before I realized how much time had passed. With winter settling over Seattle, an invitation arrived that carried a softness I hadn't felt in years. My grandmother, Ruth Carter, was approaching her 80th birthday, and the handwritten note she sent held none of the assumptions that usually accompanied family messages. It was simple, unadorned, and extended without pressure, an acknowledgement that the connection between us still mattered, even if everything around it had changed. Traveling back to Oregon felt different this time. I booked a hotel without hesitation, not out of spite, but because the decision aligned with the boundaries I had spent months building. When I arrived at the celebration, the atmosphere was warm in a way that existed independent of performance. Relatives greeted me with a mixture of surprise and careful curiosity, sensing the distance but not questioning it outright. I moved through the room with a quiet steadiness, aware of how much stronger I felt compared to the last time I had stood among them. Jenna approached me first. Her expression lacked the effortless brightness I remembered. Instead, it held a sincerity shaped by recent hardship. She spoke briefly about the shifts in her life, the job, the responsibilities, the unexpected ways adulthood had arrived. There was no defensiveness, no insistence on being understood. She seemed to recognize, perhaps for the first time, that her path had been cushioned in ways mine had never been. Our exchange was small, but meaningful, a sign that growth was possible even where imbalance once thrived. Later in the evening, my parents asked to meet privately. I followed them to a corner of the venue where the noise softened into a muted hum. They looked older than I remembered, worn not by age alone, but by circumstance. The absence of my support had forced them to confront realities they had long ignored. They didn't try to explain everything away. Instead, they spoke haltingly about oversight, assumptions, and the weight they had unintentionally placed on me for years. Their words weren't dramatic, but they carried an earnestness that caught me off guard. Listening to them didn't undo the past, nor did it erase the structure that had shaped me, but it allowed space for understanding, an understanding rooted in truth rather than denial. I didn't offer absolution. I didn't diminish what those years had cost me. What I did offer was clarity. I told them that connection was still possible, but only within the boundaries I had spent months learning to build. I didn't need grand gestures or elaborate apologies. I needed consistency, awareness, and a recognition that love without balance becomes burden. Leaving the celebration, I felt a sense of equilibrium settle into me. It wasn't joy exactly, and it wasn't sorrow. It was acceptance, an acknowledgement that relationships could continue without returning to their former shape. Growth didn't require erasing what had happened. It only required honesty. The following year unfolded with a quiet steadiness that surprised me. My work deepened in purpose, shaped by a confidence that no longer depended on external validation. My sessions with Dr. Grant shifted from unraveling old wounds to strengthening the life I was actively choosing. My connection with Ethan Collins grew gradually, anchored not in urgency but in mutual respect and ease. Nothing felt rushed. Nothing felt forced. When the next holiday season arrived, I hosted a small gathering in my Seattle apartment. Tessa helped decorate, Ethan brought food, and a few colleagues stopped by. The space felt full in a way that had nothing to do with the number of people present. It was the fullness that comes from belonging by choice rather than obligation. A package arrived from my parents a few days before Christmas. Inside was a modest notebook and a brief message acknowledging the progress they were working toward. Not perfection, but effort. Jenna sent a small ceramic charm she had made, a gesture that echoed the fragility and resilience of our renewed relationship. I placed both items gently on a shelf beside the bowl of $1 bills I continued to fill week after week, a ritual of quiet reclamation. Looking at that shelf, I realized the story I had lived wasn't about punishment or revenge. It was about recognition, of self-worth, of boundaries, of the cost of silence. Leaving had been painful, but staying would have been far more costly. Growth demanded distance and healing required truth. If there is anything this experience taught me, it's that love cannot thrive where expectation replaces care and where obligation replaces respect. Sometimes the most compassionate act is stepping away until clarity returns, both for yourself and for those who once depended on your unspoken endurance. Thank you for listening to my story. Before you go, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what part of it resonated most with you. Your reflections help stories like mine travel even farther.